Hello, my friends. Welcome to my corner and welcome to the Borges Connection. This video begins something amazing here at Jorge's Corner, and that is a podcast that is going to be completely dedicated to all things Jorge Luis Borges. Here we're going to talk about his fiction, we're going to talk about his poetry, his essays, his cats, anything that you can imagine that has to do with this great Argentine and universal writer. You're going to find it here. So I hope that you will enjoy these videos that I will be putting together for you in this new context and this new series titled The Borges Connection. So I was thinking to myself, how can I inaugurate this new podcast? So I had many ideas, okay, and many of those you are going to see at some point or another in the future. But I thought there was one idea that kind of stood out, and that was this. I thought I'm going to put together for you a top 10 of Jorge Luis Borges' poems. Now I want to say this. This is by no means the last word on the poetry of Jorge Luis Borges. These are poems that I believe to be representative, that I believe are excellent, but at the end of the day, they are poems that I liked. So I just want to say that. Now, Borges' poetry is quite vast, okay? He published more than 10 books of poetry within his lifetime. So in order to keep things under some sort of control, I used 2 books, okay, as a kind of filter. The first one is this, the famous Selected Poems of Jorge Luis Borges, the bilingual edition with translations into English. The other one is this little book, a personal anthology that Borges put together that covers the years 1923 to 1977. So the problem with this one is that we are missing almost a decade of poetry by Jorge Luis Borges, but the good thing about it is that this is basically his opinion. This is what he thought were his best poems. So that I think is worthy of being mentioned. Now with this little book, what he said himself was that he followed a purely hedonistic approach when it comes to choosing his favorite poems. In other words, these are the poems that he liked. So that's something to keep in mind right there. Okay, we're going to go by chronological order, okay, not by order of preference or excellence or anything like that. So we're going to start with a poem from 1923, and that is La Recoleta or Recoleta Cemetery. Set in a cemetery, of course. The Recoleta Cemetery is a famous one in Buenos Aires. If you have visited Buenos Aires, chances are that you have stopped by that cemetery because people go there for the architecture. Now, in this poem, what I like about it is that you already see so many of the tropes that you're going to find throughout Borges' work. Death, of course, that's an obvious one, but also mirrors. He already mentions mirrors in this one. And I like the insight into the mystery of death by such a young author, right? He was only 24 when he published this book. So I thought this was a good poem to include. And speaking of the mystery of death, we go to number 2, which deals with a similar topic, if not with the same one. La noche que en el sur lo velaron, or Death Watch on the South. This one begins with walking. So another thing that Borges liked very much, or that he was obsessed with. There are many stories of people who met Borges, for example, when he just went out for a walk in Buenos Aires, as was his custom. And this poem, Death Watch on the South, is an elegy. And the elegy is a recurring form in the poetry of Jorge Luis Borges. But the interesting thing is that you find elegies in particular in his early poems. So that's something there that I thought was worth pointing out also. The mystery of death, right? Look at this, listen to this line right here. Faces grow haggard with watching. Our eyes are dying on the height like Jesus. I always recommend, whenever you have the chance, go to the original and see how it sounds, even if you do not understand Spanish, because that will give you a closer idea to what the poem was originally like and how it reads to those native speakers. Now, one reason, very important, why I chose this poem to include it in the list is that Borges said that apart from his poem Simplicity, which is titled Llaneza in the original Spanish, this, he says, is perhaps the first authentic poem I wrote. So he had really, this poem was highly regarded in his own personal view. So I thought that was reason enough to include it here. Number 3, Poema de los Dones, Poem of the Gifts. This one is from 1960. As you may know, he published those 3 books of poetry at the beginning of his life, and then there's quite a jump because we move to 1960 with the book The Maker, or El Hacedor. And the Poem of the Gifts is about the irony of loving books and being blind, which is something that Borges would come back to many times in his work. The setting here is a library, so I thought, how am I not going to include a poem that is set in a library in a top 10 list of Jorge Luis Borges' poems? Borges thought that heaven would be a kind of infinite library, and you can tell from his stories also. So, we really needed to include this one here. Now, the thing about this one is that, yes, it deals with blindness, it deals with reading, with libraries, but you can also see a little bit of the double theme here, which was also dear to Jorge Luis Borges. He mentions Paul Grusac, who was also blind and who had been before him the director of the National Library in Buenos Aires. So there are many themes here and many connections with other works by him. Number 4 is Los Espejos, or mirrors. As I said before, mirrors were an obsession with him. And in this poem you get that sense of obsession, you get the sense of phobia of mirrors, but also you can tell that he had a sort of awe. Mirrors were awe-inspiring for him. So that's another thing that you get the feel for with this poem. And as you read it, one of the effects that it had in me was that I felt that after reading this poem, I could not look at a mirror the same way. Okay, I'm going to give you an example here of something he says that has that insight to it. Listen to this. I look on them as infinite, elemental fulfillers of a very ancient pact to multiply the world, as in the act of generation, sleepless and dangerous. So Borges had that ability to make us see the everyday things in a completely new light and an awe-inspiring light. So that's something that I like about this poem, that deals with one of his dearest tropes, these mirrors that recur in his work. So that was number 4. Number 5 is La Noche Cíclica, or The Cyclical Night. This one is from 1964. And by the way, this part, these years, the 1960s, especially the mid-1960s, I believe that is when Borges published his best work in terms of the poetry. So that's just my personal preference right there. The Cyclical Night. This one is presented to us in the form of rhymed quatrains with the pattern ABBA, which was something that he liked to do very much. It's about the eternal return. So the idea of cycles, that was also something that he enjoyed, as you can see, for example, in The Circular Ruins. This idea of cycle, of circle, recurs throughout his work. So in this one, he goes from the universal to the local, and I would even say to the personal. He really includes himself back here, but then we go back to the beginning because it's cyclical. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. So it is a kind of meta poem also because of that cyclical idea or pattern to it. So look out for that. I think that not even poems should be spoiled, so that's just something there. Number 6, límites, or limits. Okay, now this was Borges's own favorite poem of the ones that he had written, so I thought we should include it, even though he said, we shouldn't pay too much attention to what authors think about their own work. So he was very humble also, but I read the poem and I was like, okay, he was right. Okay, not surprisingly, he was right about this. This is really one of his best poems. I don't know if I would call it his best, but I still had to include it. So this is about the things that we may have done or seen for the last time without knowing it. So you could think, wow, that is pretty dark, isn't it? Yes, there's a deep sense of nostalgia, I would say, and of melancholy to this poem. But something else that could happen when you read something like this is that it could give you a new appreciation of things, and this idea that we shouldn't really take things for granted because we don't know. I may have looked at that book for the last time. I may have watched that movie for the last time. And he goes also into those connections that we have with people, the people around us. So I think this is really, really deep, and I can totally see why he chose it as his favorite. So I had to include it here also. That is límites, or limits. That takes us to number 7. Number 7 is El Instante, or The Instant. Okay, and this is a sonnet. I also tried to include poems that would give you an idea of the forms that he used. So we have free verse, we have quatrains, right, stanzas and all that, but sonnets were very, very important for him. This one is about time and the eternity of the moment. Okay, as you can tell, the instant, right? El instante. Time, the eternity of the moment. Memory is also something that goes into the mix in this great poem right here. And of course, mirrors appear again. So you can tell that that was something that Borges really had a very deep interest in. Number 8. Okay, I don't need to translate the title of this one. The title is James Joyce, and it is also a sonnet. I chose this one because many of Borges's poems are about literary figures. He has so many of them. Historical figures are also important, but in some cases it's about a writer. He has a poem, for example, inspired by Herman Melville. There's another one in which Robert Browning decides to become a poet. So this is one of my favorites of all those poems that deal with literary figures. And what we have at the center is really Ulysses. Okay, this idea that the whole expanse of a person's life fits in a way into one day, that a day will give you basically in a nutshell the experience of a lifetime from beginning to end. And I really love with this poem the last line, which I very often use as a prayer. It may be helpful to you too, I hope so. Listen to this. Grant me, Lord, the courage and the joy I need to scale the summit of this day. Let me read you that in Spanish, okay? It sounds a lot better, and the rhythm of the poem comes to me more naturally in my own native language. Dame, Señor, coraje y alegría para escalar la cumbre de este día. So it's really great stuff that we have here with this sonnet. That takes us now to number 9. And that is, Ni siquiera soy polvo, I am not even dust. Let me tell you, there's a personal thing going on with this poem. This was the first poem by Jorge Luis Borges that I ever read. It was thanks to one of my teachers in school, as tends to be the case. So thank you so much to Señorita Patricia for introducing me to this great poem. And it's a great and longish, for Borges, literary poem, because it is about Don Quixote. And he wrote many poems about Don Quixote, of course, but it is also about Cervantes. So it's about the connection between Don Quixote and Cervantes, the connection between the character and the author who created him or dreamed him up. The last line is really quite powerful, and it recalls one of his famous short stories. So I'm not going to read it. I want you to experience this one. And I feel that if I share that line with you, I may be spoiling the reading experience for you. And we are now in number 10, which is the last step on our journey. For this one, I chose a poem from 1981 titled La Dicha, or Happiness in English. Okay, so happiness in Spanish we say felicidad, but in this case it's La Dicha, which is a very different word, but you still translate it into English as happiness. So I thought, I'm going to choose something from the final years, and why not go with something that is about what we all want, right? Happiness is what we all want, no matter who, right? That is something that unites all of us. This poem is quite representative of that last stage in Borges's poetry, because you have that sense of enumeration. It's something that he got from Walt Whitman. So you can see plenty of that right here. Some of his poems from the last period are basically lists of things. So it gets really interesting. And I think this is one of the best examples of that. It's a poem in free verse, okay? And it includes, even though you have that enumeration, it includes some really nice lines. For example, praised be the love wherein there is no possessor and no possessed, but both surrender. Praised be the nightmare which reveals to us that we have the power to create hell. So great stuff, really, even at the last period of his poetry, of his work. In 1981, you get some really good poems by Jorge Luis Borges. So that is my list, the top 10 of Jorge Luis Borges' poems. And at this point, I want to say once again that please don't think that these are Borges' best poems and that is the final word. This is just my opinion combined a little bit with Borges' own opinion. But what I want to do now is I want to include you in this discussion and in this video. I wanted to ask you to please share with us what is your favorite poem by Jorge Luis Borges. Or if you can give us a list, that would be amazing too. You can do your own top top 10 poems by Borges. So please share in the comments, so that we can expand this list, because as I said before, or as I suggested, choosing only 10 poems in the entirety of Borges' poetic work is kind of ridiculous. There's quite a bit of irony involved in this, but I still thought it would be a nice way to get started this podcast of the Borges Connection, which I hope that you will enjoy. So those were my top 10 poems by Jorge Luis Borges. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you have any comments, questions, recommendations, or recipes in the comment section. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.